Jason, welcome to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's so great to meet you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes, and I know it's morning for you, evening for us, because you're in the old dart, way over there. But we just got interested in your stuff. Someone brought you to our attention. We had a look, and we thought, oh wow, Jason does what we do. Talk to people, find out about stuff, and then we looked in, and you do a lot of work in addiction, particularly the processes of change, and you started out in the corporate area, then you end up in this human area. We've said a couple of things about you, but how about you give us a little bit of a elevator speech of how you got yourself to here and doing what you do?
Yeah, it's kind of a long journey, but I'll make it as short as possible.
Yes, just do your life story in 2 minutes.
Yeah. In 5 minutes. I'm 29 years in recovery. So I had a life of addiction. That was my kind of story, which started off with a traumatic loss of my dad. He was killed in an accident when I was a little boy. And from there, my life was eating disorders and psychiatric systems and so on, and sort of being very off key, I guess was the word as a child. I received diagnosis at a very young age, and then when I was a young teenager, I found drugs and got into addiction and crime and jails and institutions and locked wards and chaos. Basically that was my life of escapism from myself. And so I got into recovery, into 12-step recovery, and I kind of found that it was a bit like a whack-a-mole approach where, okay, I stopped taking drugs and alcohol, but all the other addictions, food, everything else just kind of consumed my life. So I thought I'd become a psychotherapist because surely if I could understand how to help others, I would be able to help myself, because I was still suffering. Meanwhile, I started my IT career. So I had this parallel experience going on of kind of being a therapist and having a career in IT, which I still have. I still have an IT business and still work with people. And somewhere along the line, they kind of collided. It's kind of like where a person who wanted to build an addiction treatment company came to me and said, would you come and do all our marketing and stuff like that? And I ended up being heavily involved in one of the biggest, I think the biggest private provider of addiction treatment in the UK. And I kind of helped them build out, to a huge investment from a US healthcare brand. But that's where my two careers collided, my love of what I do in IT and my love of helping people with addictions, but meanwhile my practice and my own self-development evolution had been going on, and even though I'd had all these qualifications in psychotherapy and many other things, in NLP, in CBT, in person-centered, in psychodynamic theories, it's kind of like I still wasn't happy, and come to think of it, I always say this, that I knew a lot of therapists and they weren't happy either. It's kind of like I didn't really know anyone who was genuinely just happy. I don't mean happy because they got a new car, a new house, or a new girlfriend, or lost weight. I mean just happy for no good reason, everyone talked a good life story, but when they secretly came to you and called you up on a Sunday night or something when they were struggling and suffering, they told you the truth about how they'd been behaving in secret, in the same way that I'd been behaving in secret. It's kind of like with pornography, with gambling, with compulsively eating and all those things, as a way of coping. Then I kind of thought, nobody seems to really know, nobody seems to have really found happiness, and it's like, and how can I really help someone else? I mean, like, all these qualifications had given me this real sense of presence of being with my own suffering. So the way I describe it is we could sit in the dark, with my clients, my therapy clients, we could sit in the dark, great, but nobody knew where the light switch was. It's kind of like I could sit with them in their pain and their suffering. I could take them back to their past and as had been done with me, it's kind of like, and really look at this disconnection, this parental sort of relationship, the trauma, all this stuff that you learn in those type of theories. But I couldn't really teach them the one thing that they wanted, was how to be free and how to be happy. It's kind of like, it didn't seem like it was possible to me because I hadn't discovered it for myself. And through all my stuff, you know, it's like, to cut this shorter, you know, it's kind of like, through all my stuff, and I say this is somewhat serendipitous, or life was guiding me, you know, it's kind of like, I got to the point where I was 22 years clean. I had a long list of qualifications, and I wasn't happy, you know. It's kind of like, I'd done everything I could. As soon as somebody would bring up a new, because all these new therapies are coming out all the time, EMDR, RFT, DBT, you know, it's kind of like they were all coming out over these years when I was doing it, and I would be going, yes, I need that, maybe that's the one, you know. It's kind of like, so I would go to all these new things. I've done the Landmark Forum, I've done the Hoffman process, I've done silent meditations, you know, it was endless what I would do. And I ended up doing Tony Robbins. I did all Tony Robbins stuff. I went across the world to America doing this stuff, and I came across the understanding of the three principles, which was by accident, I guess, or not. You know, it's kind of like I was listening to this video of Michael Neal, who shares the understanding of Sydney Banks, and something, you know, like, it was the first time where I'd felt that real resonance with listening to something, and something inside me was like, there's something about what this guy's saying that I need to know more about. I didn't know what it was. Like, it wasn't in my intellectual capacity as a therapist and an understanding of how change works and what people, wasn't that, you know. It was like there was something inside me going, there's something here for you, there's something deeper, there's something that whatever he's saying, I couldn't, you know, intellectually reconcile it. But so I kind of sat with that for a while, and then nothing happened. I carried on in my struggling and suffering. But then a year later, I was going to LA for a coaching training with another guy. And I looked at this, I said, oh, that guy, Michael Neal, yeah, I remember him. He lives in LA, doesn't he? I'm just going to look on his website, just like that. And like 2 days after I was on this other coaching training, he had this thing on which he called infinite potential, infinite possibility, I think he called it. And it was what was called an intensive, you know, which is quite funny because it's probably the most relaxed thing that I've ever done. And I thought, I've got to go. I just knew it. You know, it's kind of, I've never been to LA before at this time. This was like 6 or 7 years ago. And it was quite expensive. And a friend of mine paid for me to go. I couldn't afford it, you know. And I feel like that was a beautiful thing, you know. It's kind of like, because perhaps I wouldn't have had that opportunity if it was just down to me, you know. And I went there, you know, with my list of qualifications in my mind and my ego and my identity, thinking, what can anyone else teach me about change? You know, it's kind of like, I'm 22 years clean. I've worked with addiction for 20 years. I've got all these qualifications. You know, it's kind of like, which was really just a manifestation of my own insecurity. You know, it's kind of like, that's all it was. You know, I've sat in a room of people. You know, it's like I've got to appear to look like I know what I'm talking about. You know, it's kind of like, so I was feeling really irritated. And I remember Michael just said to me, I had this notebook out and I was waiting for him to start, you know, and I was feeling more and more pissed off. You know, I was going, God, this thing's so expensive and there's 5 of us here. We've all paid this same amount of money. And he's just said, we've got 2 hours for dinner. It's kind of like, we're only actually in here for like 3 or 4 hours. How am I going to learn anything? You know, it's kind of, I'm going to get my money's worth, because I had the money's worth story running. It was one of my things, you know. And, he just looked at me and said, you don't need a notebook. You know, he said, like, you could just be here with us. You know, it's kind of like, and just be present. And no one had ever, in all my trainings, you know, like, you turn up for years and years of psychotherapy trainings. You look around the room and the first thing everyone does is takes out their notebook and starts scribbling down everything that somebody says, you know, and it's kind of like, and that was just what I'd learned to do. You know, it's like, so it's just like, no one had ever given me that invitation. Can you just be here? Can you just be present, you know? And it was like, I was like, wow, that was new, you know, that was something different about that, you know? And I kind of thought, for whatever reason, it was such a loving invitation. It felt so loving, you know, that it was like, I was able to just put the notebook down and just relax, you know, because it's one of the things that when I work with people, I just say, look, there's nothing to hear here. There's nothing to see. Just relax. You know, it's kind of like, it's just a way of absorbing information without the filter of the intellectual mind, you know. I didn't know that back then. I was kind of clueless, you know, but like in 2 days, you know, I remember after 2 days, and this is after 40 years of suffering with eating disorders, of struggling, of feeling like I had a trauma that was impossible to resolve, after having psychiatric care, a long list of diagnoses. being in 12 steps for 22 years, having a long list of qualifications, you know, it's kind of like I sat there and I just felt calm and blissful, you know, and it was like, and I just thought, wow, what has happened? Because I didn't know, you know, I just didn't know. I just knew. I could hear the birds tweeting. I remember I was sat in this, like, on this bench swing at the back of this Airbnb, and there was this green field at the back of me. It was in Woodland Hills in LA, and I was just sat there looking around, like, and I'd drift off into my mind trying to work out what had happened, but then I'd come back to the present moment, to the feeling of my body and the present, and just think, like, wow, what's going on here? I could hear the birds tweeting. It's just like I've just woken up out of a bad dream or something. You know, it's kind of like my life was like a bad dream, and you know, that's how I got here. You know, it's kind of like a bit of a long way, but that's kind of how I got here.
No, it's beautiful, and it's the stuff that Matt and I have been pursuing, and it seems odd, because we have this thing called the science of psychotherapy, you know, to take out your notebook and take the stuff. And in our book is and we're both musicians. And so we talk about this metaphor quite often, is that when you improvise, you can improvise much better when you have good technique. But you don't, but the technique is not what allows you to improvise. What allows you to improvise is exactly what you've been saying, is to reach a point where you are calm and blissful and relaxed with the experience, that then all this knowledge just simply gels into a human experience. And I'm sure that somewhere in amongst all the neuronal firings and bits and pieces, these bits of knowledge and experience were useful. But it's, I mean, this is certainly the pursuit at the moment. I'm we do a thing called client responsiveness, where I'm trying, or being responsive to the therapist being responsive to the client, where we're looking not for how to get the theoretical framework that makes the client better, but how the client is expressing their theoretical framework. And Michael just picked it up beautifully. You were sitting there ready to take notes, and he's going, oh, wow, Jason's just told me what his problem is and what his difficulty is. I'll just relieve him of that.
Yeah.
And then he will find it. And I mean, I just thought that was, that's a grand and beautiful story. I love it.
It was very moving, you know, and it's, because I never thought I would ever, all the seeking, you know, people used to say to me, seeking's your problem. I mean, around the recovery stuff, you know, seeking is your problem. And it's kind of like, I don't say that today. I say never give up seeking to anyone, because I think seeking is your intuition of home. You know, it's your knowing that there's a place of perfect mental health within. There's a place of okayness within all people, you know, that's what I see. And that's what Sydney Banks talked about, you know, that all human beings have perfect mental health. They just don't know it, you know.
Just don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what it was for me. You know?
Yeah, I've noted in the beginning of one of my other books, I just said the client comes in, they say, I'm okay, or they say, I'm not okay. And then you do some stuff and then they say, I'm okay. Well, how do they know? And exactly that sort of thing. So, I mean, Matt and I talk about this often. We say, wouldn't it be fabulous if our ideas were so new and the residing genius of the universe? But actually, when you think about it, and it comes back, you know, like one of my other ones, I went back and it was bloody Plato who said it first. But Matt, you've been doing, you know, I mean, you've had a lot of these sorts of things yourself. This coming through, all the work you're doing in trying to understand Ian McGilchrist, you know, the master in his emissary, those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wanted to just come back to Jason and that experience, and I just wanted to ask. Well, it sounded like that was the light switch that you were you're trying to find earlier on, and. Are you able then to, once you've found the light switch, so to speak, how you've managed to articulate that to clients moving forward? So I'm keen to know.
Yeah, I mean, like, it took a while. I mean, I knew a lot of things in those moments. I knew I wouldn't practice psychotherapy as I was trained in it. You know, I just kind of knew that wasn't useful and people were not broken. You know, I could see that. And I think that's been the fundamental foundation of all my work there. It's just the knowing that people are okay beneath their thinking,
Right.
and it's like, and that's what, the way that, like, over the time after I met two people that became my mentors after my experience with Michael, because I did Super Coach Academy with Michael as well. And I kept, I'd been so lost in the story of me for so long, it's kind of, that's what I'd woke up to, that was just a story that I told myself, that was no more real today than the first time I told it. And I was living in the feeling of this story that I was telling of myself to myself and into the world. And like, no matter how many times I tried to find a different angle of how broken I was to these two mentors that I had, they never bought it. They never once said, yeah, do you know what, Jason? You're gone. You're way past this thing that we're talking about here, this spiritual truth that all people are okay. That doesn't apply to you. It's kind of like, you may as well go home. It's kind of like, that's what I was kind of expecting, but
Right.
not once did they ever go, yeah, never. It was just like, no, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. And what happens, I think, in the process of that is that, as someone else sees the perfection in you, in me, as they saw it in me, I started to see it in myself, and the story started to fall away. So the way that translates, to answer your question, is that, like, that's the fundamental foundation of my work with anyone, and I'm guided by the moment. It's kind of like, yes, stuff does come into it, it's kind of like, and all the past stuff that I did is all valuable, it all contributes. I don't dismiss any of it, and helping people wake up to the story, using metaphors, using pointing of different stuff, asking people to look, not trying to convince anybody of anything, but just saying, look, I'm going to share something with you. I don't want you to take my word for it, because I'm not trying to teach you anything that you don't already know. What I'm asking you to do is look inwardly. So, like, most people come for help, if it's their first time, the first thing they want to do is talk to you about everyone else or everything else that's wrong. It's kind of like, so we change the direction to introspection first. Let's look inwardly. And like, and sort of have people look, it's kind of like, what part am I playing in the creation of my experience? It's kind of like, look, I'm not asking you to believe me that you're creating it all yourself, but I'm asking you to look for yourself inwardly. Sometimes I have people listen to audios, different things, but we have what I call transformative conversations, where people have insights into their own suffering, into the creation of their own suffering within themselves, and it's kind of like, and the deeper this goes, like, you just, we're so close to this experience, we're so close to it, we've lived in it for so long that we don't realize that we're creating it, and it's almost like you can't see the eyes, but it doesn't mean they're not there. You can't see the creation of your experience, it doesn't mean you're not creating it, and it's like, and having people look towards this stuff, they start, at times having insights going, oh yeah, wow, I hadn't seen that, I hadn't seen that it's through my beliefs that I'm suffering about this, about right and wrong, and that's part of my conditioning. It was installed into me. We look back at the whole creation of experience sometimes, it's kind of like when we're born as a, I'm guessing this because I'm not, I can't, no one can quantify this, but like, as I see it, we're born as a seamless flow of sensations and perceptions. We perhaps don't even know I'm a body, or I'm a boy or a girl, or any of those things. They're all part of the identity as it starts to grow. It's kind of like, then all we need, is warmth and love and food. It's kind of like as a child, it's like, there's no software installation at that point. It's the hardware. We're born of the oneness of the spiritual intelligence, the same force of nature that makes the rain fall or the grass grow. It's kind of like unexplainable, but something palpable but unexplainable, with words. If that's true, it's kind of like, then everything else that comes after that is installed, is installed by conditioning. I think you mentioned earlier something about societal, something stuck with me when you were speaking about societal conditioning, or it could be family conditioning, religious conditioning, depending on, cultural conditioning, whatever you come through, the whole story is part of that creation, it's kind of like, and then helping people to see that, whose are those beliefs? Where do they come from? It's kind of like, what makes you think that's right and that's not, or, it's just starting to look at the creation of our experience and beliefs, and the root cause of our struggle and suffering is our idea that I am a separate entity. There's something inside of me, if you cut me open, apparently, called a character and a personality that, that defines me. It's kind of like, and that's not true. There's no such thing. No one's ever found a character, no one's ever found a personality, or any of those things. So like all the investigation into myself leads to nothing. There's nothing there. It's kind of like there's just a head full of flawed ideas, which my work further as it's gone on from that kind of spiritual realization is that mostly, it's a response to trauma. It's a response to trauma, the creation of I as a separate being that has to achieve, create, get in the world to be okay, all that disconnection from self, disconnection from our spiritual nature. I think that's a long answer to the question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So
that's beautiful.
In going back again to your story, so it sounds like that you wouldn't have come to this realization yourself. The prerequisite, the catalyst, the required thing is an other to recognize something about you that was not the story you've been telling yourself. Is that true?
I don't think that's a fact. I think people do have spiritual realizations by themselves,
okay.
So, but I think it's helpful. I think we can, as practitioners, therapists, teachers, whatever you call it, it's kind of like, I think we can create a space, for the opportunity, for insight, for the seeing. And if we know where we're pointing, it's kind of like, then we can help guide people to see the truth of who they are
without being overly prescriptive, because
yes.
we all have our own biases. And
my mentor, we talked about this a lot, and the words we came down to was that the other, and be it a therapist or be it family member or whatever, when it's beneficial is as just you're saying, to create an opportunity and the appropriate circumstances. And sometimes we need that assistance. And it was really interesting. I was talking to someone today who's working in their company, and they're sort of very respected and utilized in their nature of diversity and achieving diversity. I mean, he's gay, he's got a lot of other aspects, dyslexic, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that I've been talking to a lot about, and it seems to be in there, is the wrong use of this word normal, of which people are diverse from, as different from just not usual, but actually, as you're talking about, every single one of us is not usual. It's that wonderful uniqueness, but all the things that we do in our world that encourage us not to look, that beautiful thing you just said there, just stop for a second and have a look, and not big drama, go inwards, delve into, find the dirt and things, but just look. And as an actor, I think everyone should do at least a year of being an actor to learn, because you just spend a whole lot of time looking at these characters. I mean, so much of what you talked about there, I could think of Shakespearean characters that did that very same sort of stuff. Hamlet, to some extent, as he sat there doing the to be to not to be speech. It's really interesting. But at what point is it that the person finds themselves in the opportunity in the appropriate circumstances? And your story, it was after many years of doing things that maintained, but then just finding, by continuing to seek, enabled you to find the space that actually allowed you to stop looking outward and look inward.
Yeah, I mean, you could see it. I mean, many people share gratitude for adversity, in early life now, particularly if they've had some sort of awakening or realization experience that it was those things, in a way, I like the saying, you can never get enough of what you don't want. And it's kind of like, I often ask clients to sort of sit and think about that for a second. It's kind of like, well, what does it really mean? It means that life keeps, sideswiping you, slapping you. It's kind of like, until you kind of wake up. It's kind of like you keep getting into the wrong relationship until you start looking inwardly. It's kind of like you keep having difficult experiences of finances, until you start looking at your relationship with money. It's kind of like you can never get enough of what you don't want, because all of it is pointing you inwardly, to finding the place of peace that is within all human beings, regardless of the money or the relationship or the weight loss or the job title or the house size or any of the shit that we seek for, in the material paradigm of existence. It's kind of like there's nothing there. It's not, everything we're seeking outside ourselves is only available inside ourselves. And life is actually set up to guide us inside. If we just see that, we just don't know how that works. So in a way, that goes back to the last question. You're just kind of helping people see how it works. It works like that anyway. It's not really. It's not a new theory. It's just something to see,
And have you become a student of story based on what you've been saying? Because it sounds like story is a huge part.
You mean like using metaphor and story to help people see things, or
well, that and the nature of story in all of life? Yeah, really.
Yeah, I mean, I like using stories as a way of kind of helping people, like depersonalizing experience. It's kind of like, and just using stories, because when it's your experience, if you're coming to me for help, we're talking specifically about your experiences, there's so many nuances and things. It's like where people can get lost. But if you take them away from their story and look at more the nature of experience or the nature of life within, from a story or metaphor point of view, people are just more relaxed and able to hear something that's transformative, rather than when they're like tight in themselves trying to work out as what you're saying in relation to them and their life or something.
Yeah. I love going to movies particularly, but reading and theater and enjoying the show and enjoying the story and enjoying the thing. But I love those moments where I go, oh, that's a message for me. Oh, I get it. And my poor darling wife, Susie, we then come out and said, what did you think of the film? I said, yeah, forget the film. Oh, there's this bit about this and then and I can let this go and that I understand, which is and that wonderful curiosity about the possibility that life, what is outside of us is highlighting for us, is quite possible. But one of the questions, now you just sort of mentioned, Sydney Banks and sort of 3 principles of things a little ways back, and Michael did it really well. Can you tell us what those 3 principles are, or have you covered that in everything? But just sort of to get it into a little bit of a takeaway. Yeah.
I think Sydney Banks' teachings was that the 3 principles were mind, consciousness, and thought. Mind as in universal mind, as in there is a spiritual intelligence behind life, like an unexplainable force. It's kind of like that's palpable, but like, words kind of often fall short of describing it, but it's there, and thought is that we create our experience via thought. We create ourselves. We create we experience life via our thinking, and often a lot of us have got lost in our thinking, in our story of ourselves, in our idea of ourselves, in our idea of the world, in our idea of who we are and who we need to be okay. It's all completely thought created ideas, and consciousness is really, as he explained it, it's like our awareness of ourselves in the world. It's kind of like, without consciousness, thought is not brought to life, and that was really his explanation of the creation of the human experience, within that. And there is something beyond that, often like some of the things that I love about his teachings was that, there's a space beyond that you can't really explain, but you can experience, and what that, in my further pursuits and education since those realizations, with non-duality and Rupert Spira and different spiritual traditions and stuff like that. I kind of realized that you can only have direct experience. There's no truth, in the world. You can only point to direct experience. It's kind of like, and sometimes there's an internal knowing of something, but as soon as you start to use words to try and explain it, it doesn't fit with anything else, and I guess that's what Sydney Banks was the same way as many Eastern traditions, Advaita, Kashmiri Shaivism, non-duality, all those things. They're all pointing to this, to Zen Buddhism, it's all pointing to the same thing, it's pointing to the place of perfection within, like to the creation of suffering in the mind in an attempt, to return back to itself. They're all pointing to the same thing as I see it.
Yeah. And just for those that have been following us in terms of Ian McGilchrist and the left and right hemispheres, this is the right hemisphere's direct perception of things, as opposed to the abstract representation of things in the left hemisphere. Sorry, just chuck that in there, Jason.
No, it is, but it's one of the really interesting things, and Matt's just we've just done the latest issue. Matt's going through and covering it over the whole year, and just this idea that actually the logical, rational, objective mind is actually quite abstract, because it's not founded and settled within what are the deeper aspects. And the deeper aspects can, as that you've been talking about there, those fundamentals of manageable, of enjoyable human experience, are there regardless of some of the details. And it's just once you start to get those sorts of aspects. I remember with the Dalai Lama one time, and he was being asked a whole bunch of questions, and some sort of rascalious interviewer said, well, Dalai Lama, this reincarnation thing that you've been banging on about, what if it's not true? And the Dalai Lama thought for a second. He said, well, it doesn't matter. We're sort of like, it's lovely. I live my life well. It's a nice bit of detail. But if it's not that bit of detail, everything else is wonderful. And it's I hear so much of that in what you're saying, and that wonderful thing that you've done, which Matt and I have done ourselves, as I say, despite the fact that we talk about a lot of details, is that we try to bring it back to saying, so how does that help us, enrich us in our understanding of our human experience and other people's human experience? And then we start to make beauty of the world. As my mentor said, he had an article or 10, 15 years ago now, Art, Truth and Beauty. And it was in a psychotherapy magazine. And everybody just was, horrendous. They were castigating of the article, but it was just ahead of its time and beautiful.
I think what you were just saying, it reminded me of like the knowing thing that I was talking about. That the details of experience, like experience happens. I'm not talking. It took me a few years to sort of, and I guess my articulation of what I've seen and what I share with people changes as my own insights happen. And like, I sort of thought, because I'd come from a life of suffering, a long time of suffering, that somehow that experience that I had, because it was quite blissful, that life was now going to be perfectly blissful and there was no human experience, but like in my later years, I've come to realize that it's all divine, that our humanity is divine too, all the triggers, all the moments, all the getting lost in experience, happens still, because that's all part of the design, it's like, but there's always a knowing. There's always a knowing that there's nothing I need to do, like the details of experience don't color the background, it's kind of like there's a background in knowing that I'm okay no matter what now. It's kind of like I don't need to go off and, and get help for my momentary loss of when I shout at my kids or something, for a minute or something like that. It's kind of, I can quite laugh at myself and think, oh yeah, it's kind of like I got lost in that again, because it happens from time to time, it's kind of like I ride the I ride the roller coaster of the human experience much more gracefully, than what I did. I'm not trying to escape it anymore. It's kind of like, because I really thought there was an escape, a life of bliss. If I really could understand these spiritual teachings and truths, which I don't know how much you've looked into, but some of them are like, there's no body, there's no anything, there's nobody there. It's kind of like, that's some of the extreme neo-Advaita spiritual teachings, that like there is only awareness, and then there's the creation of yourself within awareness. Somehow has people thinking, well, if I could really actualize and realize this spiritual point and this spiritual truth, then I'll be completely blissful. It's like, but we're human. We're experiencing a body. We're experiencing traumatic imprints, generational stuff, sensations of the body and perceptions of the mind. It's kind of like, and it's all okay. It's like, it's no longer something to be fixed. It's just something that happens,
I love that. And it's all okay. When we're talking about this work with addictions, which I think is really important, the focus that you've done on that as the lived experience and also the learned experience, and then the experience, that final thing. This work you do with the and the program you apply, how does that settle in with all this interesting stuff that you've been talking about?
Yeah, it's a good subject, addiction. It's kind of like what I saw after my experience was that like addiction is really just if we're living in a body mind, which is a self-correcting system, and it's kind of like, and again, I don't want you to take my word for it. It's kind of like if you cut your finger and you just leave it alone, it kind of heals by itself. If you break your leg, heals by itself. You put food in your mouth, you don't have to think about digestion, just all happens automatically, pops out the other side. It's kind of like, it's all working, It doesn't even make sense that human design would include a mind that requires loads of meddling with and fixing, where everything else works by itself, right? I mean, if that's true, then addiction is, to me, is just an innocent attempt that we do to try and quieten the mind. It's like, it's a behavioral process or substance that we take as a way of quietening where we're lost within ourselves, and I often describe addiction as like the steam valve of the pressure cooker, in this self-correcting system. Like if we get a little bit lost in ourselves, which we often do, which is the creation of all suffering, it's kind of like then doing something, taking something is just a way of regulating, it's just the system working perfectly. And I think that if you can imagine a pressure cooker without a steam without a valve, a release valve, it would explode at some point. It's kind of like, which I guess is psychosis or suicide for anyone if you're looking at it from a mental health point of view. So addiction, in my mind, makes perfect sense in that respect, and it is just an innocent attempt to quieten the mind. It's intelligence at work. Addiction is intelligence at work. It's not an unexplainable phenomena or a disease. It is our system working exactly as it's meant to work. And all you have to do is see that, So when I work with people with addiction, I don't ever talk about whatever they're struggling with. It's just never a point of conversation. It's if they come with food addiction or gambling addiction, porn addiction, or, it's kind of like, then, okay, we look at the nature of life. We look at the nature of experience. We look at the creation of the mind. Who do I think I am, as a separate being, and where do I think I need to be? And look at the source and the creation of all those things. And it's really cool because I trust in this, it's kind of like that at some point on the journey, I say to people, what happened with that like thing? I don't always mention it. What happened with the overeating or something? It's kind of, I just stopped doing that. It's kind of like, stop being a thing. Right. And it's kind of like, I don't know why, it just kind of didn't look interesting anymore. Or I just felt like it was really easy to stop doing it, and it makes perfect sense, right? That like if we're waking up joyful and content and happy and so on, and our life's really good and we're curious and excited about what's coming today, we don't need to medicate that. There's no need to escape from that, right? But if we're waking up like we're walking in quicksand thinking, my life is shit, oh my God, it's so bad, what am I going to do? It's kind of like, I've got to fix this, I've got to fix that, I've got all these bills, I've got this, I've got a bad relationship, I need to lose weight. Of course, we need something to take us away from that. It's kind of like, so really the awakening of the human spirit, just takes away the need for medicating ourselves in any way. And sometimes people have to break, there's a little bit more to it. Sometimes they have to break the habitual process that they've been lost in. It's kind of like, not always, but sometimes it happens. It's like, but I'm guided by the moment with that, when working with people. But it really is a beautiful experience to see people wake up to that truth of who they are and no longer need to medicate their experience.
Right. And I'm guessing that the releasing of sort of physiological, addiction to a substance or whatever is probably the easier part then, once there's been a realization of what has actually been going on in terms of,
people need to be I mean, I'm not talking about if someone has a severe addiction, perhaps they need to go to rehabilitation and be detoxed first. It's kind of like, I'm not I'm quite mindful of, because I've been through that process for a long time with people. If people come to me that have a severe require medical detox or dependency, then, suggest they get medical care for that, until they've got a clear mind and are able to sort of listen and be present with something, it's like, so, right. When you're working this way online, virtually and so on and stuff like that, unless you've got sort of physical care, you can't really deal with some cases of addiction that are extreme, like mine was. I needed to be removed from society for a period of time. I needed medical care for a period of time. I was completely incapable of looking after washing myself. It's kind of like when I was in that, and I know that it gets like that, but yeah, for many people, they're not, some people are suffering to that extent. Many people are not. They're suffering with other process and sort of binge related stuff and things like that don't require medical intervention,
Yeah. I'd really like to know, Jason, if there is a bit of a case study, bit of a feel for people that have sort of been through this with you.
If I just use food as an example, it's quite a common one. It's kind of like, I had a client that came, they'd had some sort of inclination and realization that there was something more, there was something to internal experience, but they were still compulsively eating. They're still troubled by it. It's kind of like, so often this is like the conflicting journey of people sort of starting to realize that experience is created within, but still behaving in a way that seems like, well, how come I'm still doing this? It's kind of like, I've started to see what's going on. But as I said earlier, in a lot of spiritual teachings and stuff, people kind of are searching for this blissful experience, think that there's no experience of the body or no experience of the mind, and with this particular client that I'm thinking of, there was still a lot of experience happening in her life, that was uncomfortable. It's kind of like, so basically throughout the process of 3 months, as I'm thinking about this person, we started to realize that, she got to the point where it was okay to be me. It's like through realizations, through transformative conversations and realizations that, it was like, instead of seeing, oh, this happens and it's something that's wrong with me and I really need to fix it. This happens in social situations when I'm with people. I just feel like I want to run away from them. I don't know what's going on. It's kind of like, and I need to be okay with everything. It's kind of like, so all these little areas of life, and really it was really about just reconnecting to yourself a lot of this journey. It's kind of like, I always say the most difficult thing you'll ever do is meet yourself, and it's kind of like, and that's what everyone is running away from, the present moment, so the pointing and the teachings is really about reconnecting to yourself and being in your body. It's kind of like with all the sensations that happens in life in relation. Like, as we said earlier, you need another person, right? So life is a mirror, it's like every other person, every other object is a mirror, and there's a response to that. It's like, so seeing that it's all okay, it's kind of like every time that that she would come with something more, this is happening, and it's kind of like, yeah, and what's wrong with that? It's kind of like, oh yeah, I thought I had to change that. I really was lost in this story that there was something wrong with me. It's kind of like, so all of it is the relaxing into the truth of who we are, and you start to see that all experience is okay. And it was only towards the end that I'd said, it's kind of, how's that eating thing going? Oh, that's gone. It's kind of like, I've just changed it. It's no longer seems like a habitual thing that I need to do, so it's non-linear, you know, and everyone is different and unique, and but everyone is escaping the present moment in some sort of lost concept of themselves and idea of the world. You know, it's kind of like, so the collapsing of the stories, and the collapsing of the story of me, and the collapsing of story of how I need to be, you know, it's like, or where I need to be okay. And when those things collapse, people just see, you know, that they are okay, you know, and they ride the roller coaster of life more gracefully, more contently, more happily, without a need to medicate or escape their experience. And I've got hundreds of people that have been through that, variations of that story. You know, it's always the same thing. It's just we all create our own unique story about ourselves in the world. So the content of the story is different, but the actual what's happening is exactly the same. You know.
That's fabulous. I used to, it just takes me back to, we did a documentary on schizophrenia, and we had some experts, but we had some lived experience, and each of them had done that very thing. They just come to be, that's their story. And there was just a wonderful thing of one of the chaps, and he was just sort of saying, well, you know, and I learned that sometimes I do these behaviors, and I see myself, and I'll just say to one of my friends here, and he had a couple of mates that and they look after each other, and he'd say, am I doing this and that? And they'd say, well, you are a bit. He said, well, I think I'll take myself off to hospital. And it was just all comfortable and engaged and self-owned. And that enabled him and the others to live a very full and engaged life without this burden of being, as you say, wrong or bad or broken or all these things at distance from being okay.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, Jason, it's been really great connecting with you. If there's any sort of last thoughts you'd like to leave listeners with.
I don't know who exactly your audience is, you know, it's kind of like, but if anyone is struggling, you know, I think that I always heard the saying, look within, look within, look within. I was like, well, where do you look? Like, is it, you know, it's kind of like, whereabouts? And what does that actually mean? You know, it's kind of like, but that willingness to wonder, even to ask that question, what does it mean to look inwardly, is a start of looking inwardly, you know. And it's like all answers are within, you know, they really are. And that's great, you know. It's kind of like it really helps us to stop on that kind of train of suffering and seeking things outside ourselves, you know.
So there we go. We just want to thank you so much for your time, Jason. And there's a mile of stuff there. We have a lot of therapists, but of course, all therapists are human beings who are going through an experience as well. So it's a great, and hopefully they'll play this to some of their clients, you know, which is really a good resource. So for now, though, we just want to say thank you very much for your time, and we wish you well in all you do.
And thanks, you guys, Jason. Thank you very much. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Richard.